This hour, we're talking about a shocking case in Wisconsin. I want to show you the defendant. Here he is. This is Austin Chronister. He's a real estate agent who's now found himself behind bars, accused of running a sex slave operation inside of his home dating back to the year 2020. The criminal complaint alleges that Chronister would make women sign contracts to live with him at his home in Milwaukee with rules that include sex on demand and wearing a collar at all times to remind the women that they were being evaluated for service. Chronister was in court on Friday for a probable cause hearing. He's accused of sexually assaulting some of the women living in the home and holding them against their will. The first witness up was an investigator in the case who described what he called sexual chores that the women were expected to complete.
Did she state anything with regards to whether or not this petechia was observed by anybody else?
Yes.
What did she say?
She said anybody who saw her would see the petechia. It was quite noticeable. Anybody in the house would have seen it. People in places of her employment observed it and had questioned her about it.
Yeah. Did AEK state whether or not she consented to this act of intercourse that occurred during that time frame and at that address?
She said she did not consent.
And the person that engaged in this intercourse, you stated was Mr. Chronister, the defendant?
Correct.
And did she state the exact manner in which this intercourse occurred, what the type of intercourse?
Penis to vagina sexual intercourse.
Okay. Did AEK state what would happen if she said no to the defendant with regards to these chores or instances of intercourse?
He would start physically beating her or doing some sort of reprimanding. If her chores weren't done, she was prohibited from attending family events, so she missed significant family events. And she was threatened at one time with being injected with some type of ingredient that would render her in a coma state. And as previously stated, he also enforced acts of sexual intercourse on her.
In your conversations with AEK, she apprised you of the fact that she was in a BDSM relationship with Austin Chronister, correct?
Yes.
And did she explain to you what that meant?
Yes.
And how did she explain that to you?
She provided a copy of a contract that she was made to sign prior to moving into the residence and the conditions of that BDSM relationship.
Now, made to sign, when you spoke with her, AEK informed you that she wanted to sign it, correct?
Yes, in order to live in the house, she needed to sign the contract.
And she wanted to live in the house?
Correct.
On her own free will?
Yes.
Okay. And so Mr. Chronister didn't force her to come to the home, correct?
Correct.
And in fact, let me just ask you, did AEK tell you that when they first met, it was on a BDSM dating website?
I believe so, yes.
Called Collar Space?
I don't remember the name of it.
Did she go into how she would come down to Milwaukee on her own before moving into the house to spend time with Mr. Chronister?
Yes.
And she explained to you that prior to moving into the home, that she was in a relationship with Mr. Chronister.
Yes.
So nothing about AEK moving into this home, signing this BDSM contract was anything that she was forced into.
Correct.
The whole purpose of the contract is to ensure that there is ongoing consent, correct?
Correct.
Now, part of the consent, the contract, all of that, AEK told you that she could have left the house at any time, correct?
No, she just said she didn't feel free to leave.
Okay. Didn't feel free to leave, but Mr. Chronister wasn't forcing her to stay, correct?
Correct. She just said that she didn't feel free to leave unless it was under all of his conditions.
Did she talk to you about kind of the role playing that goes on in BDSM?
Yes, and what she told me was that she was interested in the BDSM relationship. However, the things that she was reporting had absolutely nothing to do with their intimate relationship or their BDSM agreements.
Sure, but this whole concept of her having to do things, chores around the house, things of that nature, she informed you that their BDSM role was that she was basically there to serve. That was her role.
I believe
Sorry, let me just clarify. In the role-playing context.
I believe that things such as the money and the punishment sex and the physical battery, she did not agree were part of the lifestyle that she was signing up for.
Okay, so you're saying that AEK said everything else was consensual then except for those things that you just mentioned.
Correct.
Okay. And she was in this relationship with Mr. Chronister, living at that home for how long?
I believe 2 years, 2.5 years.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Oh my, so when you hear those letters like AEK or JKP, these are the letters being used to refer to these victims in the home. And what gets dicey here is that they willingly got into these BDSM contracts with this guy. So they wanted to go there to be in these consensual relationships, but the part that investigators are saying went criminal was when they were subjected to non-consensual sex, or as you heard the detective say, punishment sex, or extreme acts of violence if they resisted this guy. That's what's being alleged. This is really creepy. Coming up next, we're going to hear more in this probable cause hearing for defendant Austin Chronister, rather, is his name. And they're talking about some sex parties next that these women were forced to participate in, according to police. Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Julie Grant. We're in North Dakota this morning, 30 minutes away from the jury deliberations resuming in the toxic roommate murder trial. Defendant Nicole Rice is accused of killing her roommate, 18-year-old Anita Knutson, back in 2007. Rice's ex-boyfriend testified that she confessed to murdering Anita, but the defense is pointing the finger at alternate suspects. Let's take a listen to some of the closing arguments.
There's only one conclusion to be drawn, and that is that in the early morning hours of June 3rd, 2007, Nicole Rice took this knife and plunged it into the chest of this girl and killed her.
Their case doesn't work. Their own lead investigator, Detective Asham, told you guys she didn't review the whole file. That's not bad police work. That's insane to bring charges when you haven't reviewed a file. They're trying to say this is a puzzle with many pieces. No, it's a murder case. And everybody in here deserves justice. Anita and Nicole, and this isn't how you get it.
Some good closing arguments there. What's this jury going to do? Well, they were out for 4 hours on Tuesday. We'll see what happens this morning when they return. And of course, any updates coming from that courthouse, you'll see them right here live on Court TV. Now, let's go back to Wisconsin together. We're watching the case against Austin Chronister, the real estate agent who's accused of running a sex slave operation out of his home, dating back to the year 2020. The criminal complaint says that Chronister would make women sign contracts to live with him, consensual contracts to engage in a BDSM relationship. But police say things went south and went criminal when there would be instances of non-consensual or punishment sex inflicted on them, and extreme acts of violence if they tried to leave the home. In one instance, police say Chronister threatened to inject one of the women with a substance that would put her in a coma. We're listening to the probable cause hearing testimony that happened on Friday. This is testimony we have not yet aired. Let's go back in the courtroom. We've got an investigator in the witness box talking about these alleged sex parties that Chronister would have.
You had said that she was not allowed to turn down intercourse. Was that something you had said?
Correct.
Was that with Mr. Chronister or with other people?
Both.
Okay. When she said who did she say she was forced to have intercourse with other than Mr. Chronister?
Mr. Chronister held BDSM sex parties at his residence, and she said participation was mandatory unless you were at work. And you weren't allowed to turn down any kind of sexual intercourse.
Okay. Was she able, though, to give you information about who she had sexual intercourse with other than Mr. Chronister? So you didn't actually confirm in your investigation that she was required to have sex with anyone else?
Correct.
And then at this BDM sex parties, did you have any evidence that any money was required for entry to the parties?
Objection relevance.
Goes to the human trafficking component about receiving compensation.
It's labor services, not monetary gain.
But there still has to be a benefit of the labor services, which hasn't been established.
Overruled. You can repeat the question.
Sure, thank you. Did individuals have to pay Mr. Chronister money to attend these BDSM parties? Actually, strike that. Do you have any evidence that individuals had to pay to attend these parties at Mr. Chronister's residence?
I do not.
What dates specifically did AEK give you that these non-consensual things happened?
She indicated that after moving into the residence is when they began, until she left.
And what year did she say she moved into the residence?
I believe it was 2018.
Okay, and she left in October of 2020. Does that sound about right?
About right, yes.
Did she say why she moved out of the house in October of 2020?
Yes, she didn't want to be hurt any further, and her relationship with Mr. Chronister was over. She didn't consent to the physical violence that she endured while she was a resident there.
Well, on those specific occasions that you said.
Correct.
Because there were physical things that happened that she did consent to. Correct?
But you asked me why she left, and I said,
Okay, fair enough. Now, as far as the credit cards that she said she was forced to take out, did you see those credit cards that were in her name?
I did not.
Do you have any proof of any financial records that she was required to take out lines of credit?
No,
So you have no evidence corroborating that statement?
not at this time.
Okay. And then as far as not being able to see her family, did you do any investigation into those allegations?
Her mother was present at one of the times I interviewed her.
Okay. And was her mother aware that she was living at Mr. Chronister's house?
Yes.
Okay. And then did her parents inform you that they were actually paying rent for her to be able to live there?
No.
Okay. Did you ask her how she paid rent?
She told me she had a job and had to take screenshots of her paycheck and send it to another member in the residence.
Okay. Did you observe those screenshots?
I did not.
Okay. And it's common for people to pay rent to live someplace, correct?
Yes.
Did AEK state whether or not there were any, counsel asked you about any financial stuff, but did she have any birth certificates or social security cards or personal identifiers that were in the home?
Objection beyond the scope of cross-examination. I didn't ask about any personal identifiers.
Overruled. You asked about her role in the home and how she was there and for how long she was there and why. Go ahead.
Yes, she said she had to turn over her original birth certificate and social security card to a member of the house where it was kept in a lockbox, and she had to change her name to the initials ESP.
Did AEK have access to her identifiers in this lockbox?
No.
Did she state why not?
It was just part of the rules of the house, this particular individual maintained control over those items.
Was AEK able to access, you mentioned that AEK was previously unable to access her mail. Did she state why?
She told me that,
Judge, I'm going to object. I didn't ask anything about mail.
And I agree, sustained. I don't have any notes about her asking about mail either.
Now, counsel asked you some questions about the topic of human trafficking in general. Now, have you ever dealt with human trafficking cases before?
yes,
Do they sometimes start out as something that would be cooperative or consensual?
yes,
Do they sometimes turn into something that consent is no longer there?
yes.
Is that what happened in this particular case?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Did AEK tell you that's what happened here?
Yes.
Did AEK feel like she was free to leave the home?
No.
Did she say why?
Objection asked and answered.
Sustained.
Oh, this is really bad. So important to understand, these women got into this relationship with this guy, contracts to live in his house, to engage in BDSM consensually. But then things turned criminal, police say. Police say that there was trafficking going on, sex assault going on, false imprisonment going on, that these people were subjected to abusive treatment. This is far beyond the scope of what they bargained for and illegal. What's going to happen with this case? This is stunning. This guy also a real estate agent, this defendant. All right, let's talk about it. I want to bring in former prosecutor. He's an attorney now in the private sector, Randolph Rice, on the program. Randolph, wow, you've seen a lot in your years practicing in criminal court. There's always something new, like a case like this. Tell me your initial impressions, please, as we get little bits of this testimony that came in on Friday.
Yeah, Julie, this is quite a wild one. I'm certainly going to say this is why preliminary hearings are so valuable to the defense, because this is really free discovery. The ability for the defense attorney to ask that investigator these very poignant, very direct questions to get information, draw information out that not only do you get that information, but you've now locked this investigator into that testimony that you can then use against her down the road at trial. I'm going to play my defense hat here, or put my defense hat on here and say I have a million questions about this case. First off, the contract, what did it say? Why is there a gap between the 2020 date of when she leaves the house and when she actually reports this in 2024 to the police? Why does she report this? I mean, there are a million questions that, yes, right now this may not seem logical to everyone else, but it may be logical in the world that these people were living in, and I think there's so much more to dig into right now in this case.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, wouldn't you love to see the contract, right, Randolph? You bring up a great point. What did these women want to do? You know, we're hearing what they didn't want to do, at least little bits of it from this investigator. I know there's a whole lot more. Taking a look at the criminal complaint, it's really stunning, the things that these women allege happened to them. It's horrific. So what were they bargaining for, and then what did they get? Yeah, apparently this guy, according to the criminal complaint, had a sex dungeon in the basement. And Randolph, you know, I have to wonder, like, did these women know him how? Did they meet him online? Had they visited the home prior to going there? So many questions, and I don't know when we'll hear from them. Let's talk about that, right? So at this juncture, the prosecutor's office is trying to protect them, right? That's evident, using the initials, all that. At what point do you think we're going to potentially see and hear from them in the public courtroom?
Well, they've certainly got some rights to be protected, and I think the state's going to try as long as they can to keep their names out of the public. But at some point in time, they're going to have to be identified in court if this case goes to trial. But here's another very important fact for the defense in this case, and I think it's very helpful to the defense. If you have multiple participants in these sex parties, that means the defense has more people that they could theoretically bring in to say, hey, look, AEK, which is who the state is identifying as the victim, AEK was a willing participant. At no time did she ever say stop, or did she ever say this wasn't comfortable, or did she ever bring it to us? And, you know, we were confident in the house. She never came to us and said anything. She never said, apparently she had employment that she was going to and they saw injuries. She never brought it up to her employer. So again, this makes me think that there maybe was a consensual relationship here, that AEK, the victim in this case, was willing to do these things. She knew full well what it may be and what may happen. And so that may give the defense some ground to argue on.
Always great insight from you, Randolph Rice. Thank you for all of that. There's more to this case. We're going to hit a break. When we come back, we'll hear from an investigator talking about how one victim tried to escape the home. That's next.
On opening statements.
Did living together lead to a brutal murder? We'll preview each day's proceedings in the toxic roommate murder trial.
Opening statements with Julie Grant. Mornings at 8, 7 Central on Court TV.
It's a whodunit Hollywood story.
Monica Cimentelli is accused of plotting to kill her husband.
Celebrity hairstylist Fabio Cimentelli.
The celebrity stylist murder trial continues Tuesday on Court TV.
Thanks for being with us on this Wednesday morning. I'm Julie Grant. We're in Wisconsin for the probable cause hearing of real estate agent Austin Chronister. This guy is accused of sex trafficking, sex assault, and unlawful imprisonment. Police say that he was holding women inside of his home against their will. But it's more complicated than that. These women went there willingly, looking for a consensual BDSM relationship. So where did things go wrong? Well, let's return to the courtroom where an investigator is talking about one of the victims trying to leave the house.
Were you involved in the investigation of an incident that occurred on November 4th of 2023 at 3022 West State Street in the city and county, Milwaukee, Wisconsin?
Yes.
And what was your role in that investigation?
We conducted a follow-up interview with the victim with the initials of JKP.
And when you spoke with JKP, did JKP state whether or not any incidents occurred at that residence at that time?
Yes.
And that would have been at the address or on the date of November 4th of 2023?
Yes.
What, if anything, did JKP state to you?
She reported that she had been living at that address of 3022 West State Street in the city and county of Milwaukee for approximately 6.5 years, and had been in a relationship with another occupant in the house by the name of Austin Chronister. She indicated that she wasn't happy with the living situation and other individuals that are being brought into the home. And she informed Mr. Chronister that she wanted to leave.
Did JKP state whether or not this Mr. Chronister allowed her to leave?
After she indicated she wanted to leave, he indicated he wanted to talk about it. They met in person in the house. When she informed she wanted to leave, she attempted to move past him to get her things to leave, at which time she reported that he grabbed her. She attempted to run up the staircase of the house. He tackled her, held her down against her will, and dragged her up through her hands up the staircase to a second floor landing.
Was JKP free to leave when she was being dragged up the stairs?
She felt like she wasn't free to leave or unable to leave.
Yep. And you stated this happened without her consent?
Yes.
What happened when she got up the stairs?
She got up the stairs. She described Mr. Chronister doing something that he's done to her in the past, which she described as a signature choke slam move, and which he said he'd lift her up from underneath her neck, pick her up off the ground, and slam her onto the staircase landing, at which time he continued to, she described banging her head against the floor of the landing, feeling like he was crushing her head like a pancake.
What, if anything, did JKP state happened next?
She said it felt like she couldn't breathe. She felt dizzy, and at one point she felt like she passed out.
Did JKP state what happened next?
She said the next thing she remembers, she woke up in Mr. Chronister's bed, which was across the hall from the landing, and he was forcibly having penis and vagina sexual intercourse on her.
Okay. What, if anything, did JKP state happened next?
She said the next thing she remembers is being downstairs, which she described as being the living room or parlor area of the house, and Mr. Chronister having control over her head. He described her hands being in the back of her head and squeezing down like a vice grip, and forcing penis to mouth sexual intercourse on her, causing her to gag and throw up.
Did JKP state whether or not she consented to either of these acts?
She said she did not consent to any of these acts.
Now, did JKP state anything with regards to the general living situation at the residence?
Yes.
What?
She said that she was part of a BDSM group and part of a house called the House of St. Pierre, in which there's numerous females living in the house and expected to contribute to the upkeep of the house, as well as Mr. Chronister's sexual needs.
Did JKP state whether or not she had to sign a contract?
She indicated she signed a visitor contact or contract upon first meeting Mr. Chronister.
Did this include any particular rules for her?
Yeah, the rules were to, again, participate in work around the house, and again, his sexual needs, but also indicated she was free to leave at any time.
Did JKP state whether or not she was ever threatened?
She felt like she was threatened at one point when he had slammed her to the ground. He had made comments that he was going to do something regarding her occupation license and getting that revoked, and that she doesn't leave him.
Did JKP state at any point in time whether or not she knew AEK during any of your interviews?
Yes, she indicated she was one of the females living at the house at the time that she was.
Okay, so this is a tricky case, no doubt. Let's talk a little bit about that, what it's like prosecuting a case like this one. Let me bring in our legal analyst guest, Randolph Rice. Randolph, hearkening back to your time as a prosecutor and issues that can be uncomfortable, unconventional, sensitive. This case is involving all of those things. What are some of the things prosecutors are going to go through with these women privately through their interview process, through the vetting process? Would you kind of walk us through some of the things that they're going to need to know in order to be equipped to bring this case?
Yeah, I mean, you first start off with any type of, when these cases, listen, like Julie, like you said, these are very difficult cases because this is such sensitive topics. These are topics that typically are not discussed in general conversations. But what you do is you bring the victims in and you start off, at least I would do, and when we did this in the past, was you sort of say, look, these are going to be the ground rules. These are kind of be what to expect. Sort of client management, even though you're not the client in the defense sense, you're the client in the sense of the victim, saying, look, this is what to expect. Let me give you the worst case scenario, okay? And then you start working back up to what you think may happen so that they are prepared as they work through this case. And remember, they're still investigating. I'm sure they're collecting more statements, more evidence. So you really just give them the worst case scenario, and then you work backwards as to what you think may happen, but at least they expect or know what could happen.
Right, Randolph. You know, and it sounds like from what I'm reading in the complaint and then hearing in this hearing, it sounds like there was control going on in a couple ways: physical, emotional, coercive, and even financial control that these women had to contribute in order to live to the house. What about pieces of evidence? What things can you think of that these women could potentially put forward to substantiate their claims of what they say happened to them?
Yeah, I think forensics is going to be huge because the talking about, and we see this in a lot of other cases, about text messages, phone calls back and forth, maybe voicemails have been left, but text messages oftentimes corroborate what a victim is saying on the stand. Let's say something happened back in 2020 and the victim says, you know, I didn't feel comfortable or this assault happened. Okay, well, the defense say, well, why didn't you say something? Well, I did. Here are a series of text messages with my confidant, with my friend, with a partner, with somebody I felt comfortable with to confirm at the time of the assault that it actually happened. So those are really big pieces of evidence. You know, there may be videos. I mean, look, it sounds like this was a strange house that they were all living in. Who knows? There may be even video cameras in that home that they may be able to find through a warrant or some sort of subpoena.
Right, Randolph. I'm going to leave you with one of the last lines in the complaint. I think this is very telling. It says the defendant would isolate them all from their family and would pit them against each other. And even though we know that there was, you know, this initial attraction, let's call it, with the BDSM relationships, what I see, Randolph, I'm sure you do too, is classic domestic violence, the triangulation and the isolation that we know occurs with batterers.
Yeah. I mean, this is a tactic that the military has used for years until obviously they started outlawing some of it in certain situations, is where you isolate individuals, you put them in situations where they become desperate for some sort of outside connection or some sort of support system, and then you have more control over them, like they do to say, like the military may do to somebody that they want to interrogate, they want to get information out of, or they want to have control over them. The same tactic appears to be used here by this Mr. Chronister, who was separating these victims and trying to keep them from family and money, and even one saying he was going to threaten to take away their license. So You're right, Julie.
Exactly. Randolph Rice, always excellent analysis from you. Thank you for everything this morning. We'll be right back with more. It's great to have you with us on this Wednesday morning. Welcome to our second hour of Court TV Live. I'm Julie Grant. I want to show you the cases we're tracking for you at this hour in North Dakota. We've got jury deliberations about to get underway any minute now in the toxic roommate murder trial for defendant Nicole Rice. In Michigan, we've got jury selection continuing in the battered and burned murder trial for Linda Sturmer. And jury selection also resuming in Massachusetts. They're close to getting this jury in the murder case against Dr. Ingolf Turk. Right now, we're taking you to Wisconsin. We're following a stunning case there. The defendant's name is Austin Chronister. He's a real estate agent who's accused of running a sex slave operation in his house dating back to the year 2020. The criminal complaint says that this guy would make women sign contracts to live with him and engage in BDSM. But they say it went south when he began forcing certain sexual acts upon them, making them engage in punishment sex and abusing them mentally and financially. Now, Chronister was in court on Friday for a probable cause hearing. Let's take a look at some of what the investigator said regarding the alleged punishments that these women say they had to endure.
Did JKP ever state whether or not there were instances where she was being forced to do acts within the home for this Mr. Chronister?
I believe she had indicated that she was expected to participate in BDSM sex parties in a sex dungeon that was in the basement of the house.
Yeah. Did JKP state whether or not she was allowed to decline to do these acts?
She indicated that it was expected for her to do the acts.
Did JKP state whether or not she'd be punished if she did not do these acts?
Yes.
What did she state?
Punishments could vary from taking privileges away at the house, food items, attention from Mr. Chronister, and that it could turn physical as well if she denied.
And now, did you ever go to this State Street address?
I did.
And did you see a Mr. Chronister that was described by JKP at that address?
Yes.
And do you see a Mr. Chronister that you were described by JKP at that address in the courtroom today?
I do.
And was that Mr. Chronister at that address when you were there?
Yes.
To your knowledge, was he the lawful resident of that address?
Yes.
Was he the owner?
He is part owner, yes.
Okay. And do you see this person in the courtroom today?
Yes.
Can you tell me where this person is seated and what they're wearing?
He's seated at the defense table wearing a blue suit and has a facial beard.
I'd ask that the record reflect the witness identification of the defendant.
Any objection for purposes of this hearing?
Nope.
So ordered.
I have no further questions.
I'm going to start with the last thing you were kind of going over with, which were these parties. Did JKP tell you they were called play parties?
I can't remember the exact word that she used to describe them, but they were. She described sex parties.
Okay. And did she talk to you at all about the culture of play parties or sex parties in the BDSM community?
Yes.
Okay, and that's very common, correct?
I'm only familiar with this particular incident. I couldn't speak on if it was common or not.
Listen, you don't have to be an expert on BDSM play parties. I'm asking what JKP had told you that these were common in that community.
She described there was numerous parties at the house.
And that she had when she moved to the house, knew that these type of parties may be something that happens, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And she, again, on her own, or let me ask you, JKP on her own decided to move into the house, correct?
Yes.
Knowing that these things happen, correct?
Yes.
And then she signed a contract saying she wants to participate, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And Mr. Chronister didn't tell you that Mr. Chronister forced her to sign that contract to participate, correct?
No, when we interviewed her very thoroughly, she indicated that everything that happened to her that described was outside of her consent in that contract.
Well, I want to be like pretty clear though, because you're saying that she was expected, you talked about the expectation of her to participate in sex parties. That's what she told you. But she knew that was, or in her own words, she had consented to participating in those sex parties, correct?
Correct, but what she reported to us was unconsensual activity.
Okay, so what specific unconsensual activity then did she report about what happened in this participation of sex parties?
She reported the incident that happened on November 4th as being unconsensual activity, forced to stay at the location and him having sexual intercourse with her without her consent.
Okay, but that wasn't at what she described to be a sex party, correct?
No.
So I just want to be clear because the testimony, I'm a little confused. The testimony is that her participation in sex parties wasn't, so I think strike that. So her participation in sex parties was consensual.
I think there were some parties that were and some parties where I think she felt like she was expected to do it.
Okay, did she give you specific dates as to when she felt she was expected to do it?
I don't have specific dates, no.
Going back to the November 4th, 2023 incident, what you described appeared to be a pretty violent allegation. Would you agree?
Yes.
Slamming of someone's head into the floor.
Yes.
Choke slam, I'm assuming picking someone up, throwing them down,
yes.
Correct? To the point that they're losing consciousness.
Yes.
Were you aware that JKP worked in the medical field?
Yes.
Okay, and she's actually a nurse, right?
Yes.
And that level of injury, the point where you're slamming someone's head repeatedly into a floor to the point that they're going to lose consciousness, would result in some sort of injury. You'd agree?
Yes.
And so what medical records did you see from JKP that established that this medical incident, this violent attack happened?
Objection, relevance, fishing for discovery.
Sustained.
Did you review any information that corroborated that an attack had happened in the home on November 4th, 2023?
I believe she had taken photos of some of her injuries.
Did you view those photos?
I believe one of our investigators did, yes.
Okay, but you personally did not.
I can't recall if I had seen them or not.
Okay. Were you aware that JKP was working on November 4th, 2023?
I'm not aware of what her work schedule was.
Okay. Were you aware that when she returned home from work that night that her and Mr. Chronister watched a movie and then they went to bed?
Objection.
Did she tell you that?
Sustained.
Okay. So this happened, she claims, in November 4th of 2023. When was it that you met with JKP?
Objection, relevance.
Sustained.
What was the context where these allegations arose?
Objection, relevance.
Overruled.
I know that the investigation was initiated. JKP had come into Milwaukee Police District number 3 to make the report.
Okay. And you had talked about previously that JKP had told you that, and sorry, I want to go back, strike that. You said JKP came into the station to make these, that was recently?
After the incident, she came in to report.
In 2023 or 2025?
In 2024.
So she talked about how, and then I'm assuming she moved out after sometime in 2023?
She indicated she moved out sometime in the middle of November of 2023.
Okay. So she's out of the house in November of 2023. She had told you that she was there for 6.5 years and that there were some problems in the home with other women living there, correct?
She had a problem with, the problem was with how Mr. Chronister was bringing another female in, and it was issued with age and activity.
She didn't like the fact that there were other females there, correct?
Objection of relevance.
Yeah.
Sustained.
Tell you what, this is a sick case. There's a lot of work that had to have gone into this one to vet those victims, what they're saying, their stories, how things went from consensual to non-consensual to allegedly illegal. We're going to keep unpacking more of this stunning case out of Wisconsin. That guy's due back in court on April the 10th, too. By the way, mark your calendar for that. He'll be formally arraigned on that date. In the meantime, we're continuing on the verdict watch. Did you notice we've got the deliberation clock continuing to tick in North Dakota for the case of the toxic roommate murder trial? What will this jury find with respect to Nicole Rice? We'll find out together live.
Grieving widow or mastermind behind a murder.
Monica Cimentelli is accused of plotting to kill her husband.
Famed celebrity hairstylist Fabio Cimentelli.
Prosecutors say she and her lover killed Fabio to collect a big life insurance policy.
The defense may say she's a bad woman, but she wouldn't be involved in a murder.
It's a whodunit Hollywood story. But will there be a twist that no one sees?
The celebrity stylist murder trial continues Tuesday, only on Court TV.
Thanks for being with us on this Wednesday morning. I'm Julie Grant, and this is Court TV Live. We're watching a shocking case in Wisconsin playing out in a magistrate courtroom where the judge will decide whether there's probable cause to send this case up to big court, to the Court of Common Pleas, where a jury could potentially make a finding of fact. There's a look at the defendant's face. This is Austin Chronister. This guy's a real estate agent, and apparently he was engaging with contracts, engaging with women by way of contracts to have BDSM relationships. Okay, different strokes for different folks, but where police say it went bad was they say he went beyond the bounds of the contract, beyond the bounds of decency and the law. They say he was engaging in sex trafficking, sex assault, and false imprisonment, holding these women against their will. Let's go back into the courtroom. We're about to hear the judge's ruling.
State, any further witnesses?
No, Your Honor.
Defense, do you have any witnesses?
No, thank you.
Thank you. State?
State moves for bind over.
Defense?
Defense would move to dismiss without argument, except for on count 1. Commissioner, pursuant to Wisconsin statutes, the law basically states that when you have a multiple count complaint, you can, and that the court shall dismiss any count that isn't supported by probable cause. As far as count 1, human trafficking, the defense is maintaining that at this point there hasn't been a sufficient evidentiary basis for that probable cause determination for bind over on that specific count as it relates to AEK. And it wasn't very clear that what the services that were being obtained by Mr. Chronister. I think it's important to look at when, I know the state's probably going to argue that the services were these sexual acts, but the sexual acts that were discussed were consensual, that it wasn't a situation where that there was this attempt to traffic this individual, holding something over their head to have sex. We have specific incidents that the state's alleged, and they've introduced evidence that were not consensual, so that the January 2018 or the 2018 or 2019 incident, that was not consensual. But so everything else, because two people are consensually in a BDSM relationship, although that might seem weird to the average person living in Milwaukee County, that this is what the community does. That they live in these homes, that they role play, and you heard the testimony today that these women came there voluntarily, that they knew what they were doing, that they wanted to participate in that. And it was only, according to the state's own evidence that was introduced today, it was only these specific incidences of assault that are at issue, but that specific incident doesn't mean that they were then trafficked. They then left on their own and they've continued on in their own lives. So just because we might not be able to understand, or the state might not be able to understand the complexities of a BDSM relationship in this context, doesn't mean that that's human trafficking. If that was the case, then there would be hundreds and thousands of people committing human trafficking every day. Hundreds of people in this city. The people that attended the sex parties. So I think that the human trafficking count, when we look at the elements, when we look at what the purpose of that statute is, that there has not been evidence to establish probable cause that Austin Chronister trafficked AEK. So we would ask that that count be dismissed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
The trafficking was done for the purpose of service. The jury instruction defines services means activities performed by one individual at the request, under the supervision, or for the benefit of another. There's not a request that there's a monetary transaction or a monetary gain for another person. But these were services that were done for the benefit of Mr. Chronister, who owned the residence, required that these women do these acts, in particular, chores around the house or sex parties, sex with him, and if they declined, they would be punished physically. That is what the evidence shows that we have from our officers. These were done for the benefit of the defendant. They were done using bodily harm or threat to commit bodily harm, and he harbored them within the house to do so.
If I may briefly respond, thank you. When you look at the end notes of the jury instruction, it actually says that the definition of, I believe, that sexual gratification or whatever is removed from the description of benefit to the individual. And it's either on the bottom of 1276 or 1277, but just because they're in a mutual BDSM relationship where this is the role, they're both benefiting. And the testimony we heard today, Commissioner, was that everything else was consensual except for these specific instances. So again, I'll just renew my motion to ask that count one be dismissed.
Okay, thank you. Given the testimony here today, I do find that as to all four charges in the complaint, that there is probable cause that a felony was probably committed, and probably committed by Mr. Chronister. Specifically, I'm basing that on the testimony of officers who indicated that there was non-consensual sexual activity, non-consensual participation in sex parties, as well as the denial of privileges and threat or actual physical force or harm that resulted if these individuals declined to comply. So given the testimony here today, I do find probable cause to support the charges. We'll bind the matter over for trial.
There we go, up from magistrate to big court, to the Court of Common Pleas, where a jury will be the finder of fact, potentially, depending on what route this defendant wants to go. April the 10th will be the day when Austin Chronister will be back in court to be formally arraigned. There is the arraignment initially in magistrate court right at the outset of the bringing of the charges, and then once there is a probable cause hearing like this one, or in some states it's called a preliminary hearing, and it gets up to the higher court, then the formal arraignment will be done. And sometimes charges are amended before that point. Attorneys in the office will be looking at what's been brought and making any necessary changes. And from there, we will see how he wants to proceed.